Hi, I'm your host, Rowan Tonkin, and welcome to Being Planful, the show for FP&A leaders and planning experts. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Being Planful. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Dave Smith of InFlow Analysis. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
So Dave, you're one of the esteemed analysts out there in the analyst community. You're talking to customers and tech vendors alike, all day, every day. I imagine your world changed a little bit last year, and I'm sure we can talk about that in a few moments. But I'd love for you to describe to the audience what it is that you do and a little bit about your background.
Funny what I do. It's so funny. Like my friends and family that still cannot really rightfully describe what it is I do. Some of my friends think I'm in the CIA. They're like, yeah, you went to China. He went to, he's went to Australia. It's like, why are you trying? You're in the CIA, dude. But yeah, so basically, I've been an analyst, gosh, for 20 years now, right? I mean, I've been in this field. I started at Gartner, actually. And, from my days at, actually almost from my days at Gartner, I believe that I covered email. My first gig was covering email, and then Lotus Notes. Oh man, so I'm dating myself, right? But so from covering that, I began to cover the overall collaboration market on a whole. So instant messaging, unified communications, and then my journey took me into how does collaboration communications enable business processes? So then I began to back into lines of business stuff. So what does collaboration mean for sales, marketing, HR, planners and so forth. So it allowed me to move from just being a geek, so to speak, into what does the technology actually mean for people, right? And how does that enable people to get their jobs done?
Yeah, that's awesome. And obviously with all of that travel and all of that, conversing with different organizations, you get to, a unique view on what that market and what kind of technology means to organizations. Obviously, we have a very kind of FP&A minded audience, finance minded audience. And I would say that collaboration technology is only really emerging in that space.
Yeah, so funny. For years, as I've covered this space, I've been preaching the benefits, of video and team collaboration and messaging and so forth. And it took a pandemic, Roman. Like, oh yeah, we need this stuff. Video can actually help me connect with my team. My grandma, right? It can help my kids with distance learning in school. So we began to see that what we were preaching with digital transformation. That we with all these books about it, and we've had conferences and all these experts, digital transformation experts. We hired them for how many amount of money per hour. They didn't predict none of this, but overnight we saw a transformation literally happen when people's behaviors just changed, and they needed video. They needed the tools to connect and communicate. And so it was digital transformation by fire.
Yeah, and not because of any other reason, but it was also not just digital transformation by fire, but it was digital and remote transformation.
Yes.
And that's what I think, like some of us, when we talk about, in the tech industry per se, it was like, oh yeah, digital transformation, it's been coming for ages. Well, now it just happened. No one was expecting it to do it from home.
Exactly. And I mean, cause I remember even at the onset of this, I remember people were like, that were forced to work from home that didn't work from home before, and they were worried about their environment and what it looked like. And they're like, I'd have professional lighting. And it was like, it's okay. Cause I think we all began to realize that we're in unprecedented times. Like, give yourself a break. It's okay if the dog barks. My dog was just barking. Right? It's okay if the kids walk in. It's like, this is life, man. Relax. So I think there was this empathy that everyone began to have almost across the board, which led to the transformation and the behavior changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about that acceleration of digital transformation here at Planful, like one of the things that we talk about is, finance many finance organizations didn't think you could close the books without being together in the office, at month end, at quarter end, at year end. And, most companies have been through 3 close cycles, many months of close cycles, and they still haven't been in the office together. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, think of engineering team. I mean, we're here in the Bay Area, the heart of tech, right? Think of engineering teams who are used to, being, in room together, on whiteboards and planning. And I mean, this must be crazy,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, thankfully I've got a whiteboard beside me, but no one else can see it. It's just full
Yeah,
scribble right now, show notes and things like that. So,
absolutely.
Dave, when you think back, like, what is the one thing that 2020 delivered that you hope stays?
I think it delivered. Funny, I mentioned a few seconds ago was empathy. Beyond just the ability that companies, saw that, hey, you could get things done by people working remotely. Me being from Gardner, gosh, I've been remote working, gosh, Rowan, for years. I mean, my kids now, all they've known is daddy works from home. They've
Yeah.
never, seen me in an office. So they've just seen me home. And so, and I remember there was a stigma with remote work, years ago where it's like, yeah, they're just slacking off. Yeah, they're not doing anything. And yeah, I'm running the dishwasher sometimes, I'm doing the laundry, I'm running school pickup. I am doing all that. But I'm getting work done as well too. But I think that this whole stigma that no, you can actually, if people are empowered with the resources and so forth, they can get a lot of work done. They can miss out on traffic and actually spend more time. Where actually the detriment to it all was I think I began to work a little too much, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
you're working into the night, you're not realizing, oh my god, have the kids eaten today, right? And it's
yeah. Overcompensating, trying to get more output, for some organizations that aren't used to
yeah.
it. I worked remotely for almost a decade. So I was kind of, to me, this was a return to normality. My dog thought it was the best thing ever. He's like, man, you used to work from home all the time.
Yeah.
And then you went and started back at an office and I never saw you.
Yeah.
Oh, great. The good old days, these are
Yeah.
back for me. So he's really happy about this whole work from home situation. And,
Absolutely.
yeah, the,
Yep.
the empathy, I think, is probably the one thing that I would say I want to stay. Right, I think that's
Hmm.
been a huge shift this year. Is like the
Absolutely.
way that we leaders are leading with empathy, organizations are talking about empathy more,
Yeah.
um, and even for someone like me who's in marketing, right, our marketing has been more empathetic, right, where we're trying to
Yeah.
meet customers where they are, understanding their challenges, and that's had I think a profound shift for
Yeah.
many organizations.
Yeah, it's funny because I had a conversation this week with a lady who's a VP of people, right? And it dawned on me while talking with her, I'm like, wow, we're all in the people business. Whether it's marketing, looking at external stuff, or it's HR leaders, internal stuff. We're all in the people business, and so that degree of empathy is so important because as you're dealing, whether it's marketing with customers, how do you help them experience your brand better? For
Mhm.
employees, how do you help them experience the workplace better? So we're all in this sort of people business.
Yeah, and so speaking of people and the workforce, right? That's obviously where your
Yeah.
emergence from email and then into collaboration. You spend a lot of time talking to people leaders.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the trends that you're seeing with those VPs of people right now, where they've got
Yeah.
a remote workforce. And do you believe that to be continuing as a trend? And then what does that mean for some of our audience in
Yeah.
finance? What should they be expecting from their people teams?
No, yeah. I mean, it's funny because this whole thing, it's funny thinking about workforce planning in this climate. From last year, it's almost like an oxymoron, right? How do you plan for
Yeah.
for this stuff? But in the heat of that, you actually now need to be even more proactive than ever. How do you begin to
Mhm.
now anticipate, where the workforce is going? I mean, do we, obviously we're going to have a mix of, hybrid and with in the office and remote. And so I think, implementing sort of a strategic workforce planning, you
Mhm.
know, companies can sort of build out, comprehensive talent management processes that support both HR objectives and the needs of their employees. So that the whole notion of the whole people business, piece of
Mhm.
it, whether it's, doing the hiring, training and the talent development, parts of that. So I think, it's a way for HR leaders, managers and planners to sort of create a roadmap, for key things like aligning hiring goals, with long-term needs, assigning implementation, right, and follow through responsibilities, to the right leadership, from executive, setting the strategy, from the top down, to choosing your best managers to sort of guide that process, the training, right, and so forth. So, retention. So building the company culture, as we
Mhm.
focus on people. So all these things, HR leaders have to build down a roadmap for that, and the planning piece of that is more so than just a numbers and analysis thing. And funny, one thing I've always learned from you, even with FP&A stuff, is like the data, the analysis tells a story, right? So what's the story behind the planning, behind the data that's going to inform the planning? And so that's going to be key, I think, for HR practitioners.
Yeah, absolutely. And like one of the things that kind of story element drives is, there's a lot of hidden insights, if you will,
Mhm.
for chief people officers and VPs of people that the numbers often don't tell, or they're very siloed. If you
Yeah.
think about looking at it, if an FP&A leader was looking at a headcount roster, for example,
Yeah.
they might say, wow, there's a lot of turnover in that team for
Yeah.
whatever reason. uh, you might not then join that up with engagement survey data or other types of data to
Mhm.
really understand the sentiment behind why that may be. Is it a manager? Is it a
Yeah.
department that's going through a big transformation? All of those things. And I think that's where finance and HR teams can really join together to help.
Mhm.
you know People
Yeah.
teams don't generally have the analysis people on their teams, right? So that's where
Yeah.
they need to
Yeah.
lean on FP&A leaders that we're talking to help them do that.
Yeah. And it's funny because as you look at what workforce planning does, you're trying to identify, what you need, right, and how you want your workforce to evolve. And a part of that is all about skill sets, right? And a part of that skill set that's needed is the financial planning side of it. How do you sort of marry that together? So it's not just about, from the recruiting standpoint, skill set. It's what skill sets do you need across the business to aid that planning?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, one of the things that we've certainly seen from FP&A teams is
Mhm.
the cycle time reductions of information have
Mhm.
gone from classic monthly to weekly, weekly to daily, and people teams have had to adjust to that. Like,
Yeah.
certainly here at Planful, we start every executive management team meeting with a team wellness update.
Yeah.
We weren't doing that 18 months ago. Uh, right. But, we're
Yeah.
talking a lot, empathy. Again, we're talking a lot about the empathy of understanding where our team's at, where our managers are at, not only from
Yeah.
a health and safety perspective, but from a mood perspective. So we know the sentiment of the team.
Yeah.
But when you think about, HR professionals, their cycle times have rapidly increased with their need to organize, and how are teams
Absolutely.
doing that?
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's where the understanding, having business partners in different areas of the business becomes so important. My wife now, she's an HR, a manager at a tech company here in the Bay, and so I probably hear conversations I probably shouldn't be hearing,
Like
and
you
we're
got
just like, oh,
those sweet
yeah,
earphones on. Yeah.
exactly, like these clear boys here, but it's a matter. How do you align, with different parts of the business to really have an understanding and to identify what's needed, what the problems are, how are people experiencing the workplace, and what you need to do from a planning perspective to sort of focus on their needs and their development. And again, focusing on the culture. So yeah, it becomes critical that there be a sort of an analysis of the sentiment of the organization and the pulse of the organization, and so that feedback loop becomes important, and it's frequent feedback is needed.
Yeah, so I would think, the advice that I would certainly give to FP&A professionals is to think beyond the numbers, right? To
Yeah.
think about some of the more emotive elements, right, of what's
Hmm.
happening in HR organizations,
Yeah.
and that word empathy is something that I think we're hearing a lot about. What would be your predictions for 2021, and knowing that whatever you predict is going to be wrong, because
Yeah.
I'm sure we started last year with some predictions and they're definitely
Oh
wrong.
yeah. It's so funny. So my running mantra for this year has been like, I don't want to hear any predictions from anyone unless you were able to predict last year. If you were to predict last year, I am all ears because you clearly have the pulse on God, the universe, and whatever it is. But, but not yeah, I think definitely this year it's funny. I think we'll see this year, more so this hybrid approach. I think right to work or an attempt to, and it's going to depend obviously on healthcare, and the
Mhm.
vaccine and therapies and so forth, and how that rollout happens. But I think we'll see an attempt to sort of try to get back to normal by the latter half of the year. But I think a lot of what we're talking about, that empathy piece, is definitely going to play a role because, as you mentioned, we're seeing a lot more now focus on people's well-being, prioritizing mental health, and so we're going to see people having the option and the flexibility to sort of work where and how they want to work. And so the hybrid scenario is going to come mostly from not just companies forcing it, but how people actually want to work. So their desires and their needs and how they want to work, I think is going to take preeminence over anything else.
Yeah, and how would you see that balanced with, I think I've heard a lot recently where CEOs have come out and said,
Mm.
"Do you know what? I was wrong.
Yeah.
Not everyone has to be in the office.
Yeah.
We're going to go to a remote first organization." But there's probably another, maybe this is the silent majority, or they may be silent right now.
Yeah.
But organizations that believe, actually, no, we still believe in
Yeah.
offices, and we, how would those organizations try and plan for that from a
Yeah.
collaboration perspective?
Gosh, I mean, so for instance, I brought up before, that engineering team, who's used sort of, meeting and just going at it on the whiteboard. I mean, I could see them going back, and
Mhm.
wanting to, because this certain nature of different types of work and what you do and creativity and innovation will require, different, sort of logistics, and maybe that'll be in person, right? And there's some things where you can be remote. So I think, yeah, I think it'll sort of move to where people will realize that, yeah, what can be done, remote, let's let it be done remote. But I don't think we're going to see companies force. Matter of fact, I'm seeing companies here in the Bay, Chatter and so forth, are saying that, hey, we may continue remote through the rest of 2021. So I'm
Mhm.
hearing that chatter, and then I'm also hearing some who are planning to come back in the office, for partially back in the office. So I'm hearing mixed things, but yeah, some of the major companies I'm hearing, saying they're going to still try to be remote throughout 2021, which is interesting.
Yeah. And so maybe less related to current events. Well, it's probably current anyway, but
Mm.
like when we think about enterprise software and we think about collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of us think about collaboration as, Slack and Microsoft Teams and
Yeah.
other, communication, Zoom, right? We're on a Zoom right now. They think about those types of tools. Do you want to talk about how you're seeing collaboration being embedded into enterprise software and what some of the trends you're seeing there?
Yeah, so one of the things, and it's funny, we've been seeing this, and I've been writing about this, back from my Gartner days. But we are seeing this, this move towards, okay, how do you look at technology from the sort of architecture approach, right, and look at it as solutions, right? And so you saw, or the Salesforce acquiring, Slack, right? You're seeing all these different actions, these moves of companies who are started out with in different fields, like Oracle and so forth, more, enterprise software, adding these adjacencies via collaboration to enable the business process. So we're going to see collaboration more so move to how does it impact the business process. And so that's where we see these different companies, who aren't sort of UC or collaboration guys, adding those adjacencies via acquisitions or trying to do some homegrown stuff. So I think we're going to see how collaboration begins to enable business processes even more. It's been promised for a while. I remember when I first started covering some of the stuff, we used to call, I had an acronym, CBP, communications enabled business processes, but we never saw that because if you have your SAP system, right, that's on premise, and your Microsoft or Cisco UC system, never the twain shall meet, because it's just no interoperability there.
Yeah.
So now with the era of the cloud, the ability to to sort of open APIs and integrate, we're going to see a lot more of that integration. So I think more so, that piece falling off here, but so more so we'll see the companies or tech providers now looking at how they can open their platforms even more, via APIs to integrate and business process tech providers, software vendors, we're going to see them open their platforms as well to integrate with the Zooms and the Ring Centrals and so forth. So we're going to see more tighter integration of collaboration capabilities within business processes, either from the same company or with open architecture where everyone can sort of, with an open ecosystem, begin to place their best within different platform systems.
And so from sitting back from your perspective, having kind of observed this market for 20 years, right? What's the change? Is it the cloud? Is it APIs? Is it compute power?
Yeah, I think we're moving towards simplicity, and I think it's everything you just said. Actually, it's all of that, right? It's the
Yeah.
cloud. It is enabling it, APIs and so forth. But it's like, how do you sort of take away that layer of abstraction from the user, right?
Mhm.
Even, gosh, even in the stuff that we cover with workforce planning and HR, there's a whole move towards employee experience platforms, which is the same thing. It's a glorified portal that's abstracting away all the typical HR processes, the tech, the
Yeah.
systems, and just surfacing a simple to use user interface that people can access everything they need, do what they need, get their benefits, to do everything that they need right in the simple sort of portal, based process, interface. And so we're seeing the same thing now with business processes. How do you begin to, for instance, like a CRM process, you want to surface up, details about a customer and enable with one click communications with your sales team and with that customer with all the information needed to help that customer if it's a support situation. So we're seeing a lot of that now begin to via APIs, the cloud and so forth. How do you enable these processes with technology? And so take away the friction or the complexities from the user, and they just do what they need to do, sort of an extension of what they do without worrying about what's under the hood of the car.
Yeah, and I think coming back to that word empathy again, it's right.
Yeah,
Understanding what the user is actually trying to achieve, and
exactly.
from a software provider perspective, it's like, well, now we can do that in a way that provides a lot more value than maybe we historically could have because of the open API architectures, the nature of
Exactly.
organizations have moved more of their core systems from on-premise to the cloud, which
Yeah.
actually supports that whole capability
Yeah.
for the more modern, newer vendors that are cloud first.
Yeah, exactly. And so what I'm seeing and how I've sort of been looking at is that we're seeing the move towards the experience of things.
Mhm.
And so I look at three pillars of that, right? There's like the employee experience, right? The custom experience, and then there's the ecosystem experience, right? And those three things are sort of inextricably linked with each other because the ecosystem piece we're talking about, the APIs and the open platforms, that's allowing the ability to bring in different capabilities within different platforms to give you more of a solution mindset, right? So it's not about an HR system, but what's the recruiting solution, right? What's
Mhm.
the solution for training and learning. And so if you approach from a solution mindset, it doesn't matter who the vendor is per se, it's give me the solution to get my job done. And so that then enables the employee experience, which then has an impact on the customer experience. So it's a sort of trinity of experiences that, for lack of a better term, I'm calling the experience of things, right?
Yeah, and we see that manifesting in different ways. We're obviously talking about workforce planning and
Yeah.
and finance, right? If you think about that end-to-end process, it's kind of headcount approval, like planning, budget
Mhm.
approval, all the way through to employee onboarding and engagement and promotion, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the number of tools that it takes to get from budget approval through to engagement, satisfaction, and
Mhm.
promotion, there's probably 15 different business applications involved in that process.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
we see many organizations that they're not even integrated. And so,
Exactly.
the use case of workforce planning, just integrating your planning, budgeting, and forecasting tool with your applicant tracking system and your
Mhm.
HRIS removes
Right.
a huge amount of friction from that process.
Indeed.
And if you could do that collaboratively, right, then you're starting to really speed up the employee experience, but
Yeah.
also the end kind of ecosystem experience.
Absolutely. And it's all, it's all linked together. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, for FP&A professionals, what should they be expecting from, their enterprise applications that they're using
Mhm.
every day with regards to collaboration and
Yeah.
like ecosystem and employee experience.
Yeah, I think it's sort of what we're talking about now. I mean, it's okay if you think through the solution mindset, right? And if you're solving for people, right, whether that be the employee or the customer, right? It's we're seeing now a push or move towards looking at technology investments, based on okay, what solution is it providing, whether it's for employees, or for the customer. And so, what solution that I'm going for? So again, whether it's whoever the vendor is, what's that bunch of applications that can be brought together in an elegant way, via open APIs, architecture, so forth, that can serve a solution, again, whether it's recruiting or what have you. And so we're seeing companies sort of look at technology investments based on that. So whatever you're trying to do or offer to a company, it has to be able to plug in and play nicely with their current environment and current infrastructure.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the plug and play, I think, is the most important part, right?
Yeah.
So, as someone who works on the marketing and the sales side, revenue operations, the plug and play nature of my ecosystem is amazing, right? Like we just drop in a new technology and everything plays nicely with everything else. And I think my finance peers don't enjoy that, right? They don't vendors haven't yet provided that plug and play nature for them. There's still a lot of friction, and I that comes back to your whole ecosystem experience, right? Can you talk about that for a moment?
No, yeah. So I think it's how do you, again, if you go, if you think about the ecosystem and think of one of the biggest ones out with the Salesforce ecosystem, Microsoft, where you have a bunch of people sort of solving, or trying to sort of plug and play within a particular ecosystem or platform. I think, from the workforce and the planning piece of it and finance, so forth, is like you need to be able to have a platform that's open enough, right? And the platform has to be able to have a consistent data aggregation and data analysis piece that's tied, especially for finance. That's going to be the key. I think how you manage the data piece of it is going to be key. So I actually developed art. I think I've showed you this to you before. I've developed architecture that looks at what that would look like from an enterprise perspective, where you want to have sort of a layer of abstraction that people can access whatever they need to access. But then beneath that layer, right, is all the business applications. And then beneath all that is the security layer and the data piece of it, right? So the content is on the move. It can be accessed from whatever device, but also what can you do with that content, right? Create it, get insights from that data, right? Perform analysis and so forth. So I think it's looking at this stuff, not so much from application to application perspective, but looking at the overall architecture of things and how do they work together, right? And how do they power the people that's actually involved in the business process. So if you look at the architecture, it's people at one layer, the apps that they use, sort of security layer to access those apps, and then that data layer as well.
Yeah, and then at the top end of that layer is kind of the analysis, and then the decision making and the insights, trying to service that to the people, right? So you mentioned your wife is she's a people leader. What's the one thing that your wife would ask of FP&A professionals that they might not be doing today?
Oh my God. I think it gets so funny. So her role, so she's this is where I get the term business partner from. It's actually she alerted me to this. She's like, you need business partners. And FP&A, they have to be a business partner with the HR or the people organization, because it's all the people. It's all, HR is not just everything's a people organization. I remember being at a HR tech conference some years ago, and someone got well-meaning said it's time to bring the human back into human resources. I'm like, they never left. I mean, I understand what he was trying to say. Yeah. I understand the sentiment, but it was like they never left. But I think for her, it's like, it's having more so partnership with different parts of the business, and finance being one, and having more of that sort of seamless partnership.
Yeah, and that makes 100% sense. Even I would say that the FP&A professionals that I host on this podcast and we talk to every day, I think that's certainly one of those elements where they're trying to move away from being a service desk to a strategic partner. A lot of what they're trying to do is, how can I do that when I'm bogged down by all of this other stuff, right? They
Yeah,
haven't
yeah,
got that
yeah,
ecosystem experience that you articulated
yeah,
in
yeah.
their world. So, to actually become that strategic partner, they have to go and solve for some of that ecosystem experience to
Exactly.
deliver the customer and the people experience that they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think what they have, and as we're talking about, they understand the numbers and there's a story behind it, and so there's a story to tell, and I think it's better to approach it from, okay, there's a story that's brewing, and
Mhm.
here's the story, and so it have the conversation around what's actually happening. I think having those honest conversations makes for better business partners, and makes for more empathy as you begin to work with those different constituents.
And so, what do you see, in all of your conversations with your customers, and obviously with all the tech vendors? How do you see AI and ML helping, drive the kind of the people experience with
Yeah.
enabling to tell that story?
Yeah, so lots of potential in terms of automation and so forth, giving you further insights into the data and helping you to learn, have the system learning, from itself. The drawback I've been seeing, and you probably see this a lot too with your customers, is that a lot of companies are starting these AI initiatives with bad data. The data
Mhm.
is not cleansed and it's not aggregated in any sort of elegant way, and so they're yielding insights that aren't really insights. It's leaving that it's leaving that like this is not good. And so there needs to be more of a data management approach to looking at the stuff and cleaning your data and make sure it's ready to even begin to implement AI, because
Mhm.
AI is it's not going to yield anything that's great if the data is not right.
Yeah, already starting with the signal to noise ratio that's very imperfect.
E- Exactly. So that's the
Having
one
been
thing I see though. Yeah.
Yeah, having been on that end though, I think from my experience as a technologist, one of the fastest ways to solve for that is you will never know until you actually start trying. So
Yes.
to me, it's a little bit about walking in with the right expectations of your
Mhm.
first AI endeavor, to know
Yeah.
that it's not going to be perfect straight away, and
Yeah.
maybe whatever you're implementing will help you get there, right? And
Yes.
and
Yes.
and rather than just saying, oh well, I've got to do 12 months of data cleansing and data analysis and get it
Yeah. Yeah.
perfect, just reframe your expectations to say, well, actually, I'm going to get started. It's not going to be perfect, and
Exactly.
I can clean along the way, rather than just pushing
Exactly.
it off, because you'll be left behind.
No, yeah, yeah, yeah. So you have to start, but and so to what you're saying, that's where the honesty and the transparency is going to be so important, because once you begin to expose that stuff and expose the ugly and the messes, and learn from it. But no,
Yeah.
because that's how you learn, right? You have to expose it, all the biases. You have to bring that stuff to the to the forefront and services in order to like get it better. You're absolutely right on that. I agree.
Yeah, what do they say? You've got to lay the fish on the table, or bring the fish out, right? Before you can
Exactly.
actually start doing anything. So, Dave, this has been a really insightful conversation. What would be something that you want to leave the audience with today, in terms of their understanding of what's coming for
Mhm.
them in this collaboration space?
What I would love, and probably follow up for you, is like I would love to sort of look at your world, right, and seeing what FP&A professionals are looking at from their lens in terms of collaboration, communications, and sort of communications or collaboration enabling business processes, in that way. I would love to kind of learn some of that more, because I think there is a lot of synergy as we move towards how do we sort of partner, whether it's HR and finance, or what have you, sales, marketing. How do we sort of look at this whole lens of enterprise business software from a solutions mindset, and what that will mean from a collaborative standpoint.
Yeah. So for those folks listening, go reach out to Dave and tell them what you are actually seeing.
Absolutely.
He'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure you'll gain a lot of valuable information. Before I leave you, though, Dave, I always have two questions for my guests. The first question is a simple one. Who else should I have on the show?
Oh my goodness. So funny. There is I have a young lady in mind, Carolina Milanesi. She was just at CES,
Mhm.
and she covers mobility and consumer electronics a lot, but she has a good focus and pulse on people and what trends are. And so I think she'd be really good to speak with.
Well, that'll be great. I'd love the introduction. And then number
Absolutely.
two, what does being planful mean to you?
Oh my God. So not to sound cliche, but if you you only plan, what is it? Plan to fail. If you know what's the phrase I'm thinking of here?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have to have a plan, right? Or you're gonna sort of plan to fail. And I think it's being planful is not so much about being dogmatic and so forth, but it's looking at it from a journey perspective. When you go on a journey, there's just certain things you need, and then there's certain things that you discover you need while you're on the journey. And so that's how I sort of view planning. It's stuff you kind of think ahead of time, and then realize that I'm going to need some stuff. I'm going to step on a snake. I'm going to fall down. I'm going to need some stuff in during the journey as well. So
It's funny, Michael Johnson, the famous sprinter, right? The 200 and 400 meter runner. He has a quote where he talks about, he would enter all of his races with a 5-point plan, right? And everyone's like, Michael, you're a sprinter. You don't need a plan.
Yeah.
And his comment back to them is always, you ever been grocery shopping without a list? How'd that work out for you, right? Like you always come back with stuff you don't want. You always forget something. He's like, you got to have a plan. And, even when I'm running a 200 meter race, it's like, head down, out like a bullet, right? I am fast. And that was his plan. But
And I love the Michael, the Mike Tyson quote, right? And one of the plans get punched to the mouth. But that's what I'm talking about. It's like, you have a plan, something happens to you, and then you have to adjust, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I'll leave with this, which is a lot of organizations I spoke to is like, it's not about, sticking to the plan. It's having multiple plans and managing to them, right? Managing to the various scenarios that you have planned for, right? It's become scenario management, not planning.
It's funny. One of the first things I learned in this analyst business is to have those scenarios, right? So you see analysts back in the day, we used to call them strategic planning assumptions, where you have put a probability on each one. It's kind of a CIA kind of, except because like this can happen, and this can happen. So,
well, the good news is we know you're not in the CIA because you've spoken about it too much. Anyone in the CIA wouldn't be that overt with it. So
absolutely,
we can disprove that theory for your friends. Well, Dave, it was really good to have you on the show. Look forward to speaking with you soon. And, I really hope you have a really enjoyable afternoon.
You as well. Thanks so much.
All right.
Have a great
Thanks,
weekend.
Dave. Cheers.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Make sure you hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for stopping by.